There are over 1 billion cows alive on this planet right now, raised for one single purpose. 9 billion chickens get slaughtered every single year in the United States alone. Sheep, pigs, goats, rabbits, deer, entire global industries built around animals that spend their whole lives eating grass, grain, and leaves. Now try to remember the last time you saw lion steak on a restaurant menu, or wolf, or eagle, or shark outside of a fin soup you probably shouldn't be eating anyway. Humans have farmed, hunted, and eaten almost every herbivore on Earth at some point in history. But predators? We've almost never done it. Not at scale, not as a staple, not as a habit. Across nearly every culture, on every continent, completely isolated from each other with no contact, no shared language, no shared religion, humans converged on the exact same unspoken rule. Eat the plant eaters, leave the meat eaters alone. And if you actually stop and think about it, that's strange. A wolf and a cow are both just meat, both made of muscle, fat, and protein, both edible in theory. So why does one show up on nearly every dinner table on the planet and the other basically never does? The answer isn't one single reason. It's biology, chemistry, and culture, all stacking on top of each other, all pointing in the exact same direction. Let's start with the math, because the math alone almost settles this argument by itself. In 1942, an ecologist named Raymond Lindeman worked out something that would later be called the 10% rule. At every single step up a food chain, roughly 90% of the energy gets lost, burned off as body heat, spent on movement, wasted during digestion. Only about 10% actually survives the climb to the next level. So picture a field of grass producing 100 pounds of energy. That supports maybe 10 pounds of deer, and that 10 pounds of deer supports about 1 pound of wolf. To raise a single pound of predator meat, you need 10 pounds of prey animal underneath it. And that 10 pounds of prey needed 100 pounds of plants underneath that. Predators are, by design, the most expensive meat on the planet to produce. Farming lions for food would basically mean farming animals whose entire diet is other farmed animals. The math simply never worked. To put that in perspective, raising a single cow to slaughter weight already takes years of grain, water, and grazing land that most people never even think about. Raising a predator large enough to actually eat would mean raising and losing 10 times that amount of prey animal just to keep one carnivore alive long enough to grow to size. No civilization in human history has ever had that kind of surplus energy to throw away on a single food source. It simply isn't there to spend. But cost isn't even the biggest problem. There's something quietly building up inside predator meat that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with poison. It's called biomagnification. Toxins in the environment, mercury, lead, industrial chemicals, don't disappear as they move up a food chain. They concentrate. A small fish absorbs a tiny trace of mercury from the water around it. A bigger fish eats hundreds of those small fish and absorbs all of that mercury at once. A shark eats hundreds of those bigger fish and absorbs even more. By the time you reach the very top of the food chain, you're looking at an animal that has spent its entire life quietly accumulating everyone else's poison. This is exactly why doctors today tell pregnant women to avoid shark, swordfish, and king mackerel. Not because these fish are unhealthy by nature, but because they sit at the very top of a chain that has been silently collecting toxins for years. The same deadly pattern nearly wiped bald eagles off the map in the 20th century. The pesticide DDT washed into rivers, got absorbed by algae, concentrated inside fish, and then concentrated again inside the eagles that ate those fish. By the 1960s, DDT levels inside American apex predators were high enough to thin their eggshells until the eggs literally collapsed under their own mother's weight. Bald eagle populations in the continental United States dropped to under 1,000 nesting pairs before DDT was finally banned in 1972. That is what a lifetime at the top of a food chain does to living tissue. Whether the toxin is mercury, lead, or a pesticide humans sprayed decades earlier without knowing where it would end up. And this danger isn't some modern discovery. Arctic explorers learned it the hard way more than a century ago. Sled dogs across the Arctic have known for generations, through pure instinct, never to touch polar bear liver. Human expedition teams in the early 20th century didn't get that memo. Members of Douglas Mawson's 1911 Antarctic expedition ate husky liver out of sheer desperation and came down with violent headaches, peeling skin, and eventual organ failure. The cause was later identified as hypervitaminosis A, extreme vitamin A poisoning. Polar bear and husky liver store such an insane concentration of vitamin A that a single meal can be lethal to a human body. Indigenous Arctic communities had known to avoid it for centuries, before science ever caught up with a name for why. Then there's what predator meat actually does inside the animal that produces it, long before it ever reaches a plate. Prey animals mostly graze. Predators sprint, stalk, and fight for every single meal they get. That kind of constant physical stress floods their muscles with cortisol and adrenaline and drains the glycogen that normally makes meat tender when an animal is calm at the moment of slaughter. The result is meat that's tougher, gamier, and often carries a strong, musky flavor from testosterone-related compounds concentrated deep in the tissue. Hunters who've actually eaten mountain lion or wolf almost always describe it the same way: edible in a true survival situation, but never something you'd willingly choose. And then there's disease. Predators eat the sick, the old, and the weakest members of a population, which means they're also eating whatever parasites and pathogens those animals were carrying. Trichinosis, a dangerous parasitic infection once common in undercooked bear and wild boar, spreads specifically through predator and scavenger meat. Wildlife biologists have long flagged carnivore meat as carrying a dramatically higher parasite load than herbivore meat for exactly this reason. A predator isn't just eating flesh, it's eating everything that was already wrong with its prey. Now, the rule isn't completely absolute. History has a handful of exceptions, and they actually prove the point rather than break it. Bear meat has been eaten in parts of Scandinavia, Russia, and North America for centuries, but almost always in small quantities, and almost always cooked until it's essentially sterilized. Lion meat has occasionally appeared in parts of Africa during extreme famine, when starving communities genuinely had no other option left. In nearly every documented case throughout history, humans only turned to predator meat once every safer, cheaper, plant-based alternative had already run out completely. That's not a counterexample. That's the rule confirming itself. Predator meat has always been the last resort, never the first choice. Even today, the exception remains rare and deeply controversial. South Africa runs a legal lion farming industry, but it exists almost entirely to sell lion bones into traditional medicine markets across parts of Asia, not to put lion meat on anyone's dinner table. Conservation groups have condemned the practice for years, and it remains one of the only serious attempts anywhere on Earth to farm a predator at scale. The fact that it's controversial, small, and aimed at bones instead of meat only reinforces just how firmly the rest of the world has avoided walking down that path. And then, somewhere along the way, culture caught up with biology and made the rule official. The dietary laws in Leviticus explicitly forbid eating birds of prey and clawed carnivores, naming eagles, vultures, and hawks directly. Islamic dietary law draws the exact same line, prohibiting animals that hunt with fangs or talons. Across cultures with zero contact with each other, from ancient Israel to the Arabian Peninsula to indigenous hunting traditions across North America, the same invisible boundary kept appearing again and again, completely independently. Eat the grazer, spare the hunter. Some anthropologists believe this was never only about safety. Predators were also feared, respected, in many cultures, worshipped. And you don't eat the animal you've built a religion around. You don't eat the creature whose skull sits on your chief's headdress, or whose image guards the gates of your temple. Across dozens of unrelated civilizations, the lion, the eagle, the wolf, and the bear kept showing up again and again as symbols of power, kingship, and divinity. It's hard to serve dinner out of a god. So the real answer was never just one thing. It's biology, stacking on top of chemistry, stacking on top of culture, all pointing in the exact same direction. Predator meat costs too much energy to produce. It carries too much accumulated toxin. It tastes worse, breaks down worse, and carries far more disease. And on top of all of that, we spent thousands of years quietly turning the animals at the top of the food chain into symbols instead of meals. Every single ecosystem on Earth runs on the exact same quiet arithmetic. Energy flows upward, and less of it survives the climb at every step. Humans didn't invent the rule that predators don't get eaten. We simply noticed it over and over in every corner of the world, and we built our plates around it. The wolf was never on the menu. The math decided that a very long time ago.